Brett Yormark has another ace up his sleeve to try to turn the Big 12 into a preeminent football conference as well.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Wildcats. I'm your host, Mike Luke. All right, let's see. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. Check it out, FanDuel.com. All kinds of good stuff. When you can bet on FanDuel, you know that your money is good, and you know that you will make an enjoyable experience. All right, Brett Yormark. Brett Yormark is the man of the hour, and he will continue to be. Now, when Brett Yormark took over the Big 12 about, a couple years ago, this was a conference that was reeling. And to put it mildly, it was reeling. And a big reason why was because you had Texas and Oklahoma had announced that they were bailing out of the conference. And when you think about it, that would have been something that most people would have said, well, that could be a death knell. Those are your two marquee brands. And he came in. And, with Stuart Mandel saying that basically this conference is done. And Yormark came in and he said that not only is it not done, we are going to expand. We are going to get everybody a raise. We are going to be on linear TV. All kinds of different things that came to be true. And he also, when he expanded, he had got the four corner schools. Now, a big thing with the corner four schools was always being able to make sure that you were available for them when the Pac-12 imploded. And that's exactly what happened. The Pac-12 imploded and schools started looking around and they're like, wow, Big 12, that looks pretty good over there. Sign me up. And that's exactly what Yormark did. Yormark had everything ready to go and he gave them a soft landing. And now you look at the Big 12 and you can tell that is it's easily the preeminent basketball conference in the entire country, and a conference where, how do I put this? It's a conference where you just know that it's sustainable when it comes to hoops. You got Kansas, you got Baylor, you got Arizona, you got Houston, and you've got a commissioner that knows exactly what he is doing with all of this. And it's an underrated football conference. You're going to have 5 teams in the preseason top 25. So let's not sit here and act like this isn't, something that is very, very good for the University of Arizona. Now, when it comes to what could possibly be that next move, and listen, the Big 12 right now is clearly the third conference, and I think the Big 10 stinks. Big 10 basketball to me is putrid. And yes, Big 10 football got a lot better adding those schools, but before that it was essentially 2 schools and nobody else. Teams like Iowa were in your conference championship game. That proves to me how little it is. SEC obviously is awesome at football. Their top end is really, really good. Thought the middle and the lower parts were always overrated, but be that as it may, the SEC kind of speaks for itself. But the next options here is possibly adding for the Big 12 are Florida State and Clemson. Now, these schools make a lot of sense for a couple different reasons. First of all, the ACC does feel like it's about to collapse. And when that does collapse, it has very much begs remembrances of the Pac-12 and when that collapsed. And it's for a variety of different reasons. But a big thing, too, is that the ACC, they keep losing in court. And I think that at some point, Florida State and Clemson and a variety of others are going to be able to get out of those contracts. And so why would Florida State and Clemson be natural fits in the Big 12? Well, first of all, Brett Yormark has said many, many times that he wants it to be a conference from the West Coast to the East Coast. Well, I would add to that. And these are non-AAU accredited schools, which would probably rule them out going to the Big 10. I do not care about the AAU accreditation. I went to the U of A. I'm proud to have gone to the U of A, and it's an AAU school, obviously, but my education does not, and I think anybody that went to the U of A, it is not looked at any differently if you are at if you are at an AAU accredited school, or if you are in that's a little bit different. But if you are in the Big 12 and there's schools in there that aren't AAU accredited, nobody looks at Arizona any different. The Arizona education is exactly the same, whether it was in the Pac-12 or whether it was in the Big 12. Nobody thinks it's Stanford. So, to me, that doesn't really matter. Now, on the field, then, if you were to add Florida State, you were to add Clemson, those become two. All of a sudden you have a conference that really is a marked name in football as well. I think with Big 12 football now, that it's solid. It's certainly not like the Mountain West or something, because you got 5 teams in the preseason top 25. That speaks for itself. You might say that, well, okay, but where is that top end team? And that's probably a fair thing. Now, I do think that, in the college football playoffs, it'll be interesting to see how these teams do acquit, because, again, TCU is a year removed from being in the national championship game. So you certainly got to factor that into play. But when it comes to Florida State and Clemson, I mean, listen, I know Clemson has fallen off a little bit the last couple years. It's been kind of odd because they've gotten whoever they've wanted, from DJ Uiagalelei to Cade Kupnick. They just have not been as good as, those players just haven't been as good as their write-ups were supposed to be. And, that's just kind of the way it is. Excuse me. But they're still obviously able to recruit at an elite level. I think Dabo probably gets it back. And in the Big 12, I think that would certainly be a massive program to add. Multiple championships in the last 10 years, and a program that is nationally relevant at the highest levels, from recruiting to name brand to players in the NFL. It's just one of those schools, obviously. Florida State is much the same way. Now, Florida State won a national championship with Jimbo Fisher, and with the whole Jameis Winston era, and Mike Norvell has clearly gotten Florida State back to where they believe that they should be. And with Mike Norvell, I mean, that was a team that, last year was going to be in the college football playoffs until its quarterback got hurt. So, they're right back in the scheme of things. You're adding two. If you were able to add 2 top 10 football programs, that would be a real boost there to go along with a lot of already very solid programs. I mean, like we talked about, the future of Kansas State, as long as Chris Kleiman's there, is going to be solid. You look at Kansas as well with Lance Leopold. Both those guys feel kind of like lifers. Then you look at Utah. I mean, obviously, with the job that Kyle Whittingham has done there has been second to none. That's a top 15 program. Arizona's on the ascendancy as well. You got a lot of different programs, but if you were to add 2 real marquee names like that, I think it really kind of shoots all of that into orbit. And I think that it allows the Big 12 to get very, very aggressive on what their next plans would be. And I think that those next plans would then be very interesting to see how exactly that would all play out. But overall, though, that was a big talk, and to me, it seems like something that's probably going to happen. There's a variety of reasons too that if you are the SEC and the Big Ten, that you might not want these schools, which they are silly. But we will talk about that in a second. But first, FanDuel, my friends, check it out. FanDuel.com. All right, now here's the deal with FanDuel. When you go to FanDuel, you know that first of all, your money is good. That is the great thing about FanDuel, is that when you bet, whether that's before the game, during the game, or future, your money is good, and it makes the betting experience all the more enjoyable. FanDuel.com, again, check it out. All kinds of really, really good stuff. When you look at FanDuel, you know that it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun, engaging experience, and you're going to be betting with an entity that everybody trusts. So again, check it out. FanDuel.com. This is another one of these ones where you will thank me later. Thanks for keeping it locked on, Wildcats, and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. Okay, now, Let's talk a little bit then about why these two teams might not necessarily be enviable for the Big Ten. Well, the Big Ten views itself as an academic conference, which is kind of yes, and because there's a lot of very good academic schools for sure. There's no doubt about it. But it's also kind of an interesting juxtapose because you just added a school like Oregon, which does not have a great academic reputation, be that as it may. Then you also have a school, but then when you look at the SEC, they're already trying to stack the deck in such a way that you're going to get 4 teams into the college football playoffs, all of this, automatic bids, et cetera, et cetera. If you're these teams, do you really want to add Clemson? Do you really want to add Florida State? Because that's more competition for you when it comes to those automatic bids. So I think that's something that you need to keep in mind as well. When I look at both of those, I think that those are probably schools that are going to be turned away. But their loss, it would be the Big 12's gain immensely because they would fit in really well. I think they fit in very well in the conference with the culture of the conference, and honestly, they would have very, very good chances of being able to continuously get into the college football playoffs. And again, it wouldn't be easy, but you would bring 2 absolute marquee brands into a conference and essentially you would be swapping out for football. You'd be swapping out Texas and Oklahoma and bringing in Florida State and Clemson. I mean, isn't that kind of a swap? I mean, it pretty much is it not? So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Then you're going to have some other options as well. You're going to have a Miami, you're going to have a Louisville, etc. Now, Louisville is obviously interesting because with Louisville, that certainly adds to the basketball brand. I know Kenny Payne was a disaster at Louisville, but Louisville is still a place that you should be able to win at. They've got a massive amount of money. Not only do they have a massive amount of money, they also have an alumni base. They have a fan base that is rabid for their sport. In the last 30 years, they've won 3 national championships with 3 different coaches. Like I said, it just kind of speaks for itself. A guy like they can get a brand name elite level coach at Louisville. And we'll see if that happens. But Louisville would obviously be a no-brainer. Plus, in Louisville, it's an underrated football entity. That's the other thing. When Louisville football, they've generally been pretty good. Whether that was starting off with Bobby Petrino, later on, obviously, this has been a pretty good football program. I mean, heck, Lamar Jackson went there. Then Miami, that one speaks for itself. Miami's interesting because Miami just recently was AAU accredited. I get that, but I don't know that that's necessarily a fit in the Big Ten or the SEC. That would be another one. If you were able to swoop them in and get Miami, that would be massive. Now, again, is Miami what it was, 20 years ago? No, but there's always that potential with Miami to be able to get back in there and to be able to make that next step. And if they can make that next step, then they're right back in there. So those are kind of, I think, the dream 4 schools. If you are Brett Yormark and you are the Big 12, if you can add Florida State, Clemson, Miami, Louisville, you check off a lot of boxes, and then it becomes literally impossible to be able to. It becomes literally impossible to box out the best schools the best schools in the conference because again. The Big 12 because you've got marquee brands, and that's something else I wanted to speak to for a second. I believe, and Brett Yormark has talked about this a lot, and I totally agree with him. I believe that the basketball in the conference is incredibly underrated. I believe that when it comes to basketball, I think that it's become kind of just this thing where it's like, okay, well, the conference or, basketball, we might as well just throw up our hands because basketball isn't nearly as good as football. Yes, I get that football is, I get it. I get that football isn't, that football is the king. But when you look at it, college basketball controls all of March. It controls all of the, and from December through March, all that primetime inventory, that's all college basketball. Big 12 has better basketball than any other conference. And, look at the Big 10. Big 10 sucks. Big 10 basketball has not won a title since 1999, despite getting 95 teams in each year. Boom, they stink. The SEC, Couple good brands for sure. Certainly better than the Big Ten. But if you're the Big 12, you have a powerful hand to play because your basketball is considerably better than both of those conferences. So that's something to keep in mind. And if you were to add then Florida State, Clemson, Miami, Louisville, you start knocking on the door and saying we're pretty darn close, at least to on the field performance. We're pretty darn close to being equal to what these other schools are. So that's something to certainly keep an eye on. And with Brett Yormark, again, you always get the sense that this man has another trick up his sleeve. And by another trick up his sleeve, something that nobody else really sees coming. I mean, the guy just gets it. When you watch him, there's a quiet confidence about him that, yeah, I know what I'm doing. We're going to be able to figure this out. And he figures it out. With Yormark, though, it's reassuring being in a conference where you know that the commissioner is going to be proactive. He's going to be bold. And not only is he going to be bold, he is going to put his guys in the right situation to be able to, or put his teams in the right situation to be able to capitalize on that. And I think that's something that immediately caught my eye about him. And when he talked with, when talking with him, he understands each school in a way. He wanted to get to know what made Arizona tick. He wanted to get to know what made these different schools, become what they are. And with Arizona, he said, when I really started to, dive into it, that is a rabid fan base. He says, these are people that care deeply about sports. And I thought they were a great fit. And he says, listen, with our basketball brand, we increased it dramatically by adding Arizona in here. And it did. I mean, you added a team that is one of the top 10 programs in college basketball. This is a dude, like I said, that when he looks around, when he says he's going to do something, he does it. And I think that's the best part about all of this. He does it. That's why it's exciting to be in this conference and to see where we are really going from there. Now, when it comes to the rest of all of this, I think one thing that we need to keep in mind as well is that, he's always going to be on the next move. Whereas the Pac-12 basically became kind of an elitist conference where it was like, well, we don't really want these schools because they don't fit in, your Oklahomas, your Texases, et cetera. This guy is saying, as the Big 12 commissioner, I'm about adding athletics. I'm about adding really good programs. And that's so far what he's done. Now, I had a pretty good source on the inside when it came to Arizona this last time. And, they were always going to end up in the Big 12 one way or the other. That I don't know. Obviously, I don't have the guy kind of insight when it comes to Florida State or Clemson, et cetera, et cetera. But these would be home runs. These would be, if you add these schools, these would be home runs that Brett Yormark goes to that negotiating table and he's like, no, we're not just getting 2 automatic bids. Your conference, especially like to the Big Ten, your conference isn't 3 times better than ours at this point. That's another thing too that we need to talk about. Yes, Michigan got the championship, but in the last 40 years, or in the last since 98. So going back, even 1990, they've had the Big 12 or the Big Ten has had 3 undisputed champions. And so, again, the Big Ten does not get to sit here and talk about what great football it is. Now, granted, you added those programs for sure, but Big 12, I think, can look them squarely in the eye at that point and be very comfortable with where they are at because that's just kind of where they are at. Now, when it comes to the rest of the moves that Yormark could make there and what this means for the future, there are some enticing options. Also enticing options, though, are LinkedIn. Check it out. LinkedIn, my friends. LinkedIn. All kinds of good stuff going on at LinkedIn. You probably know somebody that got a job through LinkedIn. I know somebody that got a job through LinkedIn. And if you're a hirer, you probably know somebody that got a job through LinkedIn as well. Check it out. LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege. This is another one of these where you will thank me later. You will definitely thank me later because there's all kinds of good stuff going on at LinkedIn. LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege. Check it out. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege. Again, there's a reason it's been around forever. There's a reason that everybody utilizes it. Check it out. Again, another one of these ones where you will thank me later. Thank Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats and making this your first listen of the day. I am your host, Mike Luke. Okay, now let's talk about the closing the gap aspect and what that next move could be. Yes, I do believe that closes the gap in a way that they can't be boxed out from anything, and they won't get pennies on the dollar anymore. But make no mistake, Yormark is not done, and he talked about this. He said a big thing about when we wanted to jump the line and get into these negotiations with ESPN is we wanted to be able to have some relevance on the back end as well. We wanted to be able to tell people that, we're going to be able to add schools, and we're going to be able to keep adding schools, and we're going to add, name brand flagship programs. I mean, you look at it, the schools that he added, Utah is a top 15 football entity. Obviously, you're into the mountain region again in there. Obviously, you got BYU, but then you add Colorado. Now, Colorado, I think, is going to go away once Deion Sanders goes away. But right now, it's definitely something that a lot of people are keeping their eye on. Then Arizona, obviously, you got a rabid fan base. You got a top 10 basketball program. ASU doesn't really bring you anything on the field or on the court, but it at least brings you a big market. So either way, you get it. All four of those schools, for a variety of different reasons, add to it. Those other four schools that we're talking about, that would add to them as well. And just kind of, like I said, and it just kind of seems like a natural fit. But overall, very nice to have a commissioner that certainly seems to get the grand scheme of things, because that is not something that Arizona fans have been used to at all. And obviously, we are thankful for that. Now, tomorrow, we're going to dive back into some Arizona football. We're going to start talking, camp is getting closer. We're going to start talking about camp, obviously. We're also going to start talking about, just kind of our thoughts, Arizona, and kind of being a really good betting choice for a lot of different options to be able to win the conference. And I think the people are sleeping on them. And I think for a while, this has been kind of a thing. This has kind of been a repeat thing where Big 12 schools are kind of sleeping on Arizona. So, not Big 12 schools, but just kind of the national media. Again, Arizona, a couple of years ago, was picked to have 2.5 wins. They had 5. Then last year, 5 to 10. Now, maybe they'll get 15 this year. If they get 15, obviously, that would be a very nice thing. But it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out, because, again, Arizona has you've got a really, really good quarterback. You've got the skeleton of an incredibly good team. And you've got a coach, again, I think with Brennan, there is no way to me that Brennan sucks. Now, maybe Brennan doesn't turn out to be great, but to me, there's no way that Brennan sucks. I just can't see that because, again, he's been solid. I think he's a stable guy. And you watch him and you're like, all right, this is certainly a guy that kind of gets it. So Brent Brennan, I think Brent Brennan's going to be exciting to watch going forward here, because I think there's a lot to like about him and what he can do. And so, again, we're going to break that down, how this conference or how this school kind of fits into the conference, and what our expectations should be for this year. Because, again, you've got there's some guys that are probably not going to be on this roster next year. Probably not going to have a Big Jonah next year. Probably not going to have a Takario Davis or a T-Mac. I mean, those are 3 players that you're most likely are going to be in the NFL and probably going to be first-round picks. So what does that mean then? But overall, you're in a stable conference now where you do know that your future is in good hands. And I think I speak for a lot of people, and that I would absolutely love to see this conference continue to expand and add more really quality schools to it. And you got a commish that obviously knows what he's doing. So we'll keep you all up to date on that. But as always, very, very much appreciate you all making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day. We're going to keep going with a lot of expansion talk and get into Arizona football and basketball, obviously. Thanks for making this your first listen of the day, and we will talk with you tomorrow.